Hi, welcome to automateNow. I'm your host, Marco Cruz. In today's video, we'll learn about radio buttons. We'll learn how to select them and how to verify a selection. Let's dive in. And here we are on automateNow.io. We're going to look at the sandbox page. And here we have some radio buttons. We're going to write a test to select one of these buttons here. So first we need to grab a locator. So let's go ahead and find that. Let's suppose that we want to select this button here. So I'm going to right click the element and say inspect. And here we can see that this is an input tag, which has different attributes such as type, name, value, and so forth. If we look at the other buttons here, we also see that this is using the same type of attributes. If we look at the last one, we can see that they all match. They have the same attributes. There are different ways that we can go about finding a locator for this. We could use the display text, or we could try locating by name. But I think the easiest way would be to use the value attribute because it matches the text that we're looking for. Notice that this value here, red, also matches the display text, red. White also matches the display text, white. So let's go ahead and write a locator. I'm going to do Control F, and we could write an XPath locator or a CSS locator. It's up to you. In this case, I'm going to use a CSS locator. Since this is an input tag, I'm going to say input, and then open and close brackets. Inside the brackets, I'm going to say value equal to, and then in quotes, I'm going to type white. And we can see here that we have found the element that we're looking for. So we're going to use this locator when we build our test. Now we're going to go to our code and create a new test inside of this sandbox test class. And here we're going to call a method from the sandbox page class. So we'll say sandbox page dot select radio button. And we're going to pass the name of the radio button. Now let's go ahead and implement this method. This will require a string parameter. We'll call it option. Now we're going to say driver.findElement by.CSS selector. And here we need to paste the selector that we found earlier. We will use a strategy similar to the one we used up here in this method, where we're passing an XPath and we're modifying that XPath based on a parameter that is passed in. So in here, we're going to modify this CSS selector. Because we have different radio buttons that can be selected, we need to get rid of this text that says white, and we need to use the value that was passed in. So we will delete this text, and we're going to append the option. Now we will call the .click element to click on it. One thing to note here is that this option needs to be case sensitive. If we go back to the application, if I use a lowercase w here, and I hit enter, no elements are found. So we need to make it clear that the value that is passed in needs to be case sensitive. In future videos, we can discuss how we can improve this method so that our tasks don't need to worry about the casing. So we'll add a Java doc here. And we'll say that this option parameter is case sensitive. The next thing we need to do is to write a method that will verify if a radio button is selected or not. And we will say public, and this will return a boolean, and we'll call it radio button is selected. This will take a string, call it option, and we're going to reuse this code up here. And instead of using the click method on this element, we're going to say dot is selected. And this is going to return true if the element is selected and false otherwise. So we're just going to return this. Let us go back to our test so we can use this method. And here we're going to make an assertion, and we're going to say assert true. We're going to call sandbox page dot radio button is selected, and we need to pass in the name of the radio button. So we can say white. For the error message, we'll say radio button is not selected. Let's go ahead and create a variable for this. Now we're all set. I'm going to go ahead and run this test and put a breakpoint here so that we can actually see the selection. And here we see that white is selected just as we expected. Now we can finish executing the code. And our test has passed. Now we're going to perform a few more actions in this test. Let's go back to the application. Let's say that we selected the white option. Now we want to select blue. So we're going to first select white, then we're going to select blue. After blue has been selected, we're going to verify that white is no longer selected. We know that radio buttons by default only allow you to select one option. So for this to work, I'm going to write a new variable here. I'm going to call it string radio 2. And we're going to set this equal to blue. Now over here, after we select white, we're now going to select blue. And we're going to say sandbox page dot select radio button, and we're going to pass in radio 2 to select the blue option. Now let's go ahead and make sure that the new option has been selected. I'm going to say assert true sandbox page dot radio button is selected. And again, we'll say radio 2. And here we'll say blue option. And we'll change this one up here to say, lastly, we need to verify that the white option is no longer selected. So we need to call assert false and say sandbox page dot radio button is selected. And here we're going to pass radio. And this is just making sure that the radio button that says white is not selected. That's why we're saying assert false. I'm going to rerun this test, and this time I'm going to pause here when we select the blue option. And here we can see the blue is now selected. We're going to finish executing the test, and notice that the test has passed, meaning that all these assertions passed. Before we end this video, I would like to point out that there may be times in which you will not be able to select the radio button. It will just appear grayed out. So for practice, you could refactor our method here for selecting a radio button. Let's go back to our code. And in here, we have this select radio button method. Instead of just clicking the button right away, you could write some logic here that first makes sure that the button is clickable. For that, we have a method called isEnabled. So instead of saying click here, we'll say dot isEnabled. And this is it right here. Thanks for sticking around to learn about radio buttons. Please support the channel by subscribing and sharing this with your friends. See you in the next video.